Imagine the feeling of rolling that critical hit on a clutch saving throw or dropping the big bad evil guy with it, or the devastating miss when you needed to land the attack. Dice rolls can make or break our D&D games. All TTRPGs that utilize dice have this. But have you ever wondered, what do the numbers actually mean? Today we're going to dive deep into the world of dice rolls, probability, and statistics in tabletop role playing games. I'm Robert Walker, author of Session Zero, the DMG to writing great campaigns in any system. And this is my show where I teach collaborative storytellers how to have more immersive campaigns using psychology. Today, we're going to be taking a statistical deep dive into the heart of the game, those polyhedral dice. If you've ever wondered what the numbers mean, whether you're a seasoned veteran or you're a newbie to the game, understanding the numbers behind the dice can elevate your game. Before we get into the numbers, let's talk a little bit about the psychology of chance. When we roll a dice in a tabletop role-playing game, we are essentially engaging in a random event. Even though it's random, our brains are wired to seek patterns, to find meaning where there might not be any. This is a phenomenon known as apophenia. It's when we start to believe we're on a hot streak or the dice are conspiring against us. It can lead to a range of psychological responses. When we're on a hot streak, for example, we might feel more confident, more optimistic. And when we're on a cold streak, we might experience some frustration, disappointment, even anger. It is a game of chance, and our emotions can play a significant role, but we have to remember that those things that are chance are chance. There's nothing we can really do to mitigate the variance of the dice, but if we understand the numbers, we can have a little bit more control over making the best statistical decision. Let's not confuse the control we have, though, with the illusion of control. Dice can give us the illusion of control. Even though that we know that it is a random outcome, we often feel like we can influence more than we actually can. We might try to will the dice to land on a certain number or believe that our technique or the way that we hold the dice might affect the outcome. I have always had a superstition of whenever a dice is not being rolled, to always set them with the highest number facing up, awaiting their next roll. Why? Well, because for some reason that's just the I suppose superstition that I came up with to make the dice feel like they're in their proper resting position with the highest number facing up. It obviously doesn't affect anything, but it is something that I've almost always done. There's another thing known as the gambler's fallacy that might influence us. This is the belief that if something has happened more frequently than expected, it's less likely to happen in the future. For example, if you've rolled a couple ones this session, you might start to feel like you've gotten your bad rolls out of the way, so you're going to be more likely to have success in the future, which, of course, doesn't change the way the dice roll or the statistical likelihood of getting another one. It's exactly the same as it was each time you rolled it before. So even though every time you pick up that d20, you have the same exact chance of rolling a critical success or a critical failure as you have every other time you have rolled it, let's take a look at how you actually can use the numbers behind the dice and your character sheet and a little bit of knowledge of statistics and probability to influence the decisions that you make in the game and sometimes the risks that you're willing to take with your character. First, let's talk about probability. Well, what is that? Well, probability is the likelihood of an event happening. So when we're talking about dice rolls, typically speaking, what we're talking about is the likelihood, the probability of a specific number coming up on the dice. So if you have a 20-sided dice, the probability of a 20 coming up would be 1 in 20. There is one number on that dice that is 20 sides that is the number you're looking for. Likewise with any of the other dice, it's 1 in however many sides there are. Now, if, for example, you are looking for an 18 through 20 to succeed, then you would have a 3 in 20 because the number 18, the number 19, and the number 20 would all lead to success. So your probability of success in that case would be 3 in 20. Let's look at the probability of rolling the highest number on each D&D dice as a percentage. So on a D4, getting a 4 would have a 25% chance. On a D6, it's going to be 16.67%. On a D8, 12.5%. On a D10, 10%. On a D12, 8.3%. On a D20, 5% to get a nat 20. And on a D100, of course, 1% to get a double aught or a natural 100. So let's go back to our previous example where we are saying that we needed an 18 through 20 to hit. Now, of course, we know that is a 3 in 20 probability, which of course means there's 5% chance for each of those probabilities. So there's a 15% chance you will be successful in connecting with that hit or that spell or whatever the case may be. And if you understand the probability or the percentage, the likelihood that is going to occur, it gives you a pretty good idea of how effective you might be. Now, of course, it's still chance, but you have mitigated the chance a little bit by understanding the range of, let's call it randomness that you're actually dealing with there, and making adjustments to decrease the level of variability and the amount of randomness can greatly affect the game, especially in the long run. So if, for example, you have someone cast guidance on you, it adds a 1d4 bonus to your next roll. If you're making a skill check, somebody casts guidance on you, there's a 25% chance that they're going to give you an additional 5%, a 25% chance that they'll give you an extra 10%, and all the way up to an additional 20%. They can give you a +4 bonus on your D20 roll. So if you were lucky and you ended up getting that 25% chance of the 4 bonus, giving you another 20%, now your 15% chance to be successful has gone to 35%, which is significantly better than that 15% you were at originally. Now, let's be fair. If you're counting on the guidance to give you a bonus, you should really only statistically count on what is the average bonus that it's going to give you. Well, it's going to be about 2.5 is going to be about the average on a four-sided dice. So if you wanted to be a little bit more realistic in your assumptions before making any of your rolls, you could say, okay, it's likely only going to give me a 10% extra chance to be successful on this, not a 20. But still, it can help you calculate your odds of success and have a better idea of, is this action the right action I should be taking at this time if I really need it to be successful? Or should I spend time finding a different action that can be taken that is going to have a higher likelihood of success, a higher probability? So with all that in mind, let's talk about something that happens a lot, especially in 5th edition or D&D 1, and that's advantage or disadvantage. Now, the advantage and disadvantage mechanics are commonly used, and they modify the probability of success on your roll. When you have advantage, you get to roll 2d20 and take the higher result, and when you have disadvantage, you roll 2d20s and take the lower result. So for advantage, you are increasing your probability of rolling a high number, and with disadvantage, you are decreasing the probability of getting a high number, or you're increasing the odds of a lower number. So let's talk about some actual numbers. Let's say you have a attack bonus or a skill modifier of 5, and you need to hit a DC of 20 or an armor class of 20. Well, you need to roll a 15 on the dice. Now, we know from probability that we have a 30% chance of doing this. Now, if someone gives you advantage or the situation gives you advantage, you have a much better chance of success. With advantage, the probability increases significantly. With a 15 as your target number, your odds would go from 30% to 57, almost 58%. It's like 57.75%, and that is a significantly greater chance of success. Likewise, with disadvantage, that same 15, if you're in a disadvantaged situation, you would go from 30% chance of success all the way down to 6.75% chance of success. So that is also a huge likelihood of failure that you've now gone to because of that extra dice and the probability change that occurs when you have multiples to choose from. This matters because advantage and disadvantage can significantly impact the outcome of a game, especially in the long run. A player who consistently rolls with advantage is going to have a significantly higher chance of success on their endeavors, while a player that significantly finds themselves disadvantaged will face far greater challenges. So, this mechanic does keep the element of randomness in the game and unpredictability, but it really does influence the successful or unsuccessful outcomes in the story. So, finding ways to get advantage or provide disadvantage to your enemies is going to be one of the greatest movers that you can apply to the mechanics of the game. Really understanding where you can get bonuses from, how to apply them, when to apply them, and how to get yourself into situations where you can use advantage and disadvantage can really swing the pendulum in the favor of the players or the DM if the DM is being very meticulous in their counting as well. But let's also look at statistics. Now, obviously, probability is a part of statistics, but let's look at statistical damage. Now, that is something for wizards and druids, anybody who uses damaging spells, understanding a little bit of averages and means can be really useful in determining what spells you want to use on your opponents. For example, a magic missile. Each missile does 1d4 plus 1 force damage. Now, that means that the average damage per missile is going to be 3.5 because it's 2.5 for the 1d4 plus 1 makes it 3.5. This is a very consistent damage, making it a reliable option, especially for situations where you need to guarantee a certain amount of damage, and the variability is pretty low because it's only a four-sided dice. There's not a lot of variability that's going to happen as there can be in bigger spells that use bigger dice. So let's talk about a couple other spells that are well known and very widely used. You have Fireball, which is in 5e, d6 fire damage in a 20-foot radius sphere. It's a powerful area of effect. It can deal substantial damage, and it can hit a lot of targets. Now, the average damage per fireball is going to be 28 is the average. And another great one, Cone of Cold. It does 8d8 cold damage in a 15-foot cone. It's another great area of effect, but the average damage on this one is going to be 36. So, it has a smaller area of effect, but it has a slightly higher average damage per roll. Now, this becomes really important as you figure out how you're using your spell. So, for example, if you're in a situation where you're casting an area of effect spell, you have your choice between your Fireball or your Cone of Cold. If you have a Fireball that can hit 5 targets because it's got a wider area and it can go in more directions, you can get 5 targets, or you have a Cone of Cold that you're only going to be able to hit 4 targets with. Which one do you pick? Now, here is where understanding those numbers can be really helpful. You know that on average with that Fireball, you're going to do 28 points of damage to each of those 5 creatures. And you know that you're going to do an average of 36 points of damage to the 4 creatures if you choose the Cone of Cold. Well, now what this means is that total damage average for the Fireball is going to be 140 points across the 5 creatures, or 144 points across the 4 creatures. So when you look at it in terms of total damage output, choosing the 4 creatures would be statistically better because you're going to do more damage. And in gameplay measures, you're also doing 36 to each of those on average as opposed to 28. So you also have a higher likelihood of going over the damage threshold on these creatures and dropping them. So given that situation, understanding your averages and your statistics could help you be a more effective wizard in combat. I hope you have enjoyed this look at statistics and probability in your TTRPGs. Let's move over to tricks of the trade. For tricks of the trade today, I want to give you 3 ideas for how you can use probability and statistics in TTRPGs to be more effective as you're building your characters and playing them. So first of all, use statistics and probability to optimize your ability scores. Now, what does this mean? If you're using a point buy method and you have the choice of ending up with a 16 or a 17 in a stat or dropping one of your non-core stats down and getting that 18, just remember that every time you increase that bonus by +1, if it is something that is going to be used in your normal d20 rolls, that +1 is always going to equal a 5% better chance at success across the board. So if, for example, you had a 17 strength and you decided to drop your intelligence score for your fighter down so that you could get that 1 point by and make it that 18 strength, every time you swing your weapon using your strength modifier, you have a 5% better chance of hitting. And that happens right from the get-go. So finding a way to really utilize probability from the very beginning of the game as you're building your character, especially if you're going to be a character that has one very specific thing that they're going to be using a lot of d20 rolls for, find a way to get that number as high as possible to always have that additional 5% chance every time you roll that dice. Next is to calculate your expected damage. This is exactly what I just gave you an example of with the spells. So before you're in combat, before you're slinging spells, or while you're in the middle of it, estimate the expected damage output of your attacks. This involves thinking of weapons damage dice if you're a non-caster, what modifiers you can add to yourself, what the target's armor class is, what you need to hit, but calculate the expected damage you can get on your different types of attacks or different types of spells. Then you can make a more informed decision about which attacks to use, how to utilize them, and obviously when an attack is probably not going to be a reliable way to engage in the combat for you. You might need to find a different strategy if you realize that not only is your damage threshold going to be quite low for the attack, but if your probability of hitting is extremely low anyways, you might need to find a way to maneuver or get into a position where you can add something like advantage to your attacks and really change the outcome of the way that the battle is going into your favor. And finally, utilize math for evaluating probabilities in your skill checks. Now, they are a fundamental part of most TTRPGs. Understanding the probabilities involved can help you make better decisions. So, for example, if you need that difficulty class of 15 and you have a +3 modifier, you know your probability of success is 55%. Anything that you can do to find a way to improve your modifier or use a magic item that grants advantage, remember that you're going to significantly increase your chances of success. So just remember that this game does utilize a lot of math, and having some basic understanding of averages and probabilities is going to make a lot of difference in the way that you play your game, because you'll have a much better understanding of what you're going to be good at, what you're going to be able to be successful at accomplishing, and also what you don't have a very high likelihood of accomplishing. If you do that and you keep things in mind like the gambler's fallacy, and realizing that hot streaks and cold streaks don't actually affect the way the dice rolls, but that part's all in our head, you can actually make very good informed decisions about the way that you are playing your character and the abilities that you're choosing to use for the most effect at the table. Thank you so much for listening today, Cyclothids. I really hope you've enjoyed this. It was a lot of fun to put together. Just remember, if you haven't yet, we are doing full videos of all of our podcast episodes on YouTube now. So go check out our YouTube channel. And if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe. I would really like to help grow this community and be able to find ways to keep this show going as the years go forward. Thank you so much, Cyclothids, for joining. And until next time, we'll see you next session.